So, we all love a good sitcom with some lighthearted sense of humor and especially lovable characters. The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air is one of the most famous sitcoms in television history, and for many, it is considered the debut of today's most famous and talented actor, Will Smith. The sitcom premiered from 1990 to 1996 and spanned up to a whopping amount of 148 episodes, which were compiled into 6 massive seasons. So in this video, we're gonna cover the whole show, but what's a recap without a background, right? I got you covered. So, Will Smith, and that's the name of his character in the show, is a teenager born and raised in West Philadelphia. He loves playing ball, but one day he just messes with the wrong guys in his hometown, forcing his mom to send him to live with his wealthy uncle and aunt in a neighborhood of Bel-Air, LA. Since Will belongs to a working class family, this causes some serious and yet hilarious clashes with his uncle's family, the Banks, cause, they're loaded to say the least. Anyway, this is kind of the main thing of the show, so let's get to it. So the pilot episode, The Bel-Air Project, opens up with Will rapping his little backstory about how he got into a little fight with his hometown's guys up to no good. So because of this, his mama made him move to LA to live with his uncle and aunt. When Will reaches the house, he meets Uncle Phil's butler, Jeffrey, who was baffled by his carefree attitude. And then Will finally meets with his kind-hearted Aunt Vivian, his Uncle Phil, a wealthy and a successful lawyer, and his cousins, little Ashley, and the spoiled, materialistic Hillary. When Will reaches his designated room, he embraces the new life, but stays true to his roots as he does a Fortnite emote in the room. Ashley comes into his room as she feels down, but Will tries to cheer her up by teaching her how to rap like a random kid from Philly. This cheers Ashley up, and her father introduces Will to his son, Carlton. Phil invites Will to a formal dinner, and things go from 0 to 100 real quick as his working class roots show the charm to everyone at the party. With a disappointed face after the party, Uncle Phil confronts him and explains his concerns about his influence on his children. When Phil leaves, he sees Will playing piano, and he sees some ray of hope inside him. The episode ends with Will creating a certain partner in crime bond with Ashley, and his eccentric life at the Banks household begins. In the next episode, the fresh morning begins at the Banks household, and since Will has nothing to do except goof all over Phil's children, he's asked by Phil to become Ashley's chauffeur every Wednesday. The day arrives and he drops Ashley off with other students at the class. When the class ends, he finds out how Ashley is being forced to play the violin as per her father's request. At home, Phil takes aspirin for his headache, and since Will has joined the household, he takes it frequently. Suddenly, he hears a loud bang from Ashley's room, and when he checks, he sees Ashley drumming with the help of Will. It turns out that Ashley's passion is for drums, but her father forces the violin upon her. However, Will got her a little drum set from the pawn shop. Will's friend, Jazz, joins the household to teach Ashley drums, and they go janky with it. The drums obviously cause disturbance in the household when Phil and Vivian hold a formal party. The episode ends with Phil and Vivian negotiating with Will, and they both decide to let Ashley follow her dreams. Continuing the misadventures, Will makes a not-so-dynamic entry into the formal party with Carlton with a golf cart. At the party, Will lands his eyes on a woman named Mimi Mumford, and the girl makes Will's hormones tingle up. However, her father is a dramatic man who always shoos away anyone who tries to date his daughter, unless they satisfy his choices. Will returns home and learns how to approach a woman of this class, since he never done this before, with some help from Carlton, Phil, and Jeffrey. The next day at the party, Will arrives in a certainly not perfect dress, but his talking skills really got to Mimi's father, Dr. No, and they engage in a conversation. When he is introduced to his daughter, to his surprise, she turns out to like bad hood boys. The next day, through Carlton's help, Will arrives in a gangster-esque attire but fails to meet the expectations of her father, and he tells him to be himself rather than force himself to fit in with another group of people. While Mimi likes him now, her father tells him to go dump himself in a trash can. And at the end of the episode, he tells everyone at the house how his situation proceeded. He's only left with a valuable lesson in life, and a bruise on the eye. Now, Phil is scheduled to receive his prestigious award for being a great lawyer and asks everyone to be dressed appropriately when the reporters and photographers arrive. He also reveals his parents from another country will join them pretty soon. The next day, Phil's parents arrive and they greet everyone, including the devil incarnate Will himself. Through Phil's parents, Will learns about another side of his uncle, which is that he belonged to a rural country rather than being born into a wealthy family. At the family reunion, his parents tell his whole family about how he used to jump in a swimming hole and his upbringing to the upper parts of the society. At night, Will goes to the kitchen past his curfew time and plays poker with Grandma as she tells him more stories about Zeke, or mind you, including a story where he won an award for raising a giant pig. The reporters arrive the next day and they all greet the family, but they don't like their family's attitude, mainly because of Will. The article gets published, but with Phil's hilarious life as a child as well. At the award party, he tells Will about how his mother used to tell him to be brave about his past, but he didn't like to talk about it as it was his insecurity. At the end of the episode, Phil embraces his past and gives a top speech to everyone present at the ceremony. Will became homesick, and everyone in the Banks family tries to cheer him up by giving him a Philadelphia sandwich. But he finds out it's not greasy enough and doesn't take it. He mentions his old friend, Ice Tray, with whom he used to steal some sandwiches in the morning on Fridays. The next day, Ice Tray arrives, and the family greets him like one of their own. After they become familiar with the fooly-cooly Ice Tray, they reminisce about their past together with Will. And after a few moments, Hillary enters the room. Trey and Hillary see something in each other, and suddenly they kiss as Vivian watches them. The next day, Vivian complains about Trey to Phil, but he tells her not to make big trouble out of it. However, when she checks on them again, Hillary is super serious about her relationship. With this in mind, he tells Vivian a trick to make Trey move out of the house. So the family invites the man to the dinner, and they're all happy with his presence. Not by heart, though. When the party ends, Will and Vivian have a heartfelt conversation about the values of friendship, and Trey decides to move out. As he is about to leave, he talks with Hillary, marking the beginning of his odd relationship with the Banks' daughter at the end of the episode. Phil and Vivian are about to leave for their lawyer meeting, but since no children are allowed, they leave Hillary, Ashley, Carlton, and Will in the house. Phil's partner, Firth, arrives at his house to pick them up. He asks Carlton to drive his Mercedes to the party while they ride in the helicopter. At night, when Carlton drives the Mercedes, suddenly a cheap copy of Freddy Krueger from the backseat threatens Carlton, but it's no other than Will himself. As they continue, some cops pull them over and take them to the station since Carlton neither has his ID nor car's registration with him. At the station, they try to call Miss Firth, but since they're at the party, she cannot hear them correctly and cuts the call. Carlton tries to talk it out with the police like he's a smooth criminal, but instead he gets thrown into jail with Will. Will cooks up a plan and he calls public broadcasters so this news reaches the TV, which means their parents will also see it. The word reaches fast and Mr. Firth with Phil and Vivian arrive at the police station and take their boys out. When they reach home, Will tries to tell Carlton about the racial issues in society and how the police will only see skin color when you're driving a car. Carlton doesn't believe it, but by the end of the episode, it still leaves him thinking. In the next episode, the Banks family discusses after-school activities, considering Will doesn't have one. When they mention he should look for a job if he doesn't like activities, he thinks of himself as a restaurant worker in his mind who looks scarier than a Scooby-Doo villain, and instead decides to join an after-school club. He goes to Carlton's school and joins a poetry club to impress one of the girls he sees at the school. He does manage to impress the teacher by making up a fake story about how he knows a really talented poet called Raphael. In the class, he manages to impress the teacher by making a fake poet. He returns home and meets Jazz, but when Phil arrives, Jazz makes fun of his big hanging belly, and Phil throws him out of the house, as usual. Christina, the teacher, and his crush, arrives at the house and asks Will what the made-up poet Raphael looks like, and she asks him to invite him over to a poetry night. Since Raphael is a made-up poet, he tries to lie his way out, but Christina kisses him, and now he has to agree. The party begins in school, and Christina tells Will that she will thank him after the party, and she winks at him. At the meeting, Will announces the arrival of Raphael, who reads some gibberish at the party and receives everyone's approval. However, the cover blows up as everyone finds out it's Joffrey in disguise. But Jazz was there covering up Christina's doubts and gets the date instead of poor Will. In the end, Will's poetry receives everyone's approval at home, and they're all grateful for his poetry classes. Halloween approaches, and the Banks family prepares for the party. Meanwhile, Will reads the Goody magazine, and when Carlton arrives, they bet each other on who will get a girl first, which currently looks kind of impossible. The family arrives at the mall, and both of them get right to work on their bet, but they both fail miserably. They sit at a restaurant and decide if one of them brings a date to the festival tonight, he will win. On the other hand, the other family members do their best to filter out the costumes that they want for the festival. Phil finds a noise reducer at the mall, and this reminds him of the time when Will moved in and provided Ashley with a drum set, which caused quite a noise in the house. Every family member is busy in their endeavor, and Will is on the dance stage to impress a girl, but the crowd boos him. Ashley and Hillary buy clothes for themselves. Then Hillary meets a friend and tells her all about how Will caused a disaster at the first formal party, and she's afraid that he might do something like that once more. Meanwhile, Vivian continues to sing and everyone loves her. In the end, Will and Carlton still try hard to find the perfect girl, but their hard work goes down the drain. The bet even continues in the next episode, and both Will and Carlton stumble upon a girl called Melinda and try to win her over using their charms. While Will tries to play the good guy by telling her the story about playing cards with grandmother, Carlton decides to drop the ball and tells her about the time when Will caused them trouble with the car and they got thrown into jail. To add salt to the wound, Carlton makes up a story where Will is the bad guy and Carlton is the hero who attacks the bad guys in a Michael Jackson way. However, the situation continues to escalate as both of them make up fake stories, and in the end, Carlton takes the victory as Melinda likes raw strength and physical attraction. The family returns from the mall and they get ready for the party tonight. Everyone has arrived and the party begins with everyone dressed in their costumes. Carlton mocks Will for not having a date. Suddenly, Jeffrey leads the new guest, a woman in a tiara, and she's looking out for Will. That woman is the waiter at the restaurant at the mall. And then Carlton's date gets arrested at the party as she turns out to be a thief, and the policemen take her away. Will dances with Cindy, his date, but she runs away as she's getting late somewhere. After the party, some kids arrive at the house, and since they're out of candy, Will invites them in for a scary story time. In the end, Will tells the kids the story, and just as he was about to introduce the monster, Carlton enters the room right on time. The madness continues to unfold, and Vivian plans to leave her house for one night as she has to give a lecture at Berkeley. She asks Will to listen to Uncle Phil. This marks a god-awful day for him since he is left alone with his vicious uncle. Meanwhile, as soon as everyone leaves the house, Carlton brings his girlfriend home, but Hillary crashes in and doesn't let them have a quality time together, so they have to move out to the mall. Will asks his uncle for his card. He begs on his knees and only then manages to retrieve it to go to the pool hall. When Will reaches there, he sees the gangster-esque pool hall keeper and decides to play on the table with an exceptionally good player. He bets his money on it and beats him, and then continues to beat everyone present at the table until he is matched with an impeccable guy who beats Will, and now he owes him $300. Since Will is broke, he fails to pay up, and the pool hall confiscates Uncle Phil's car. On the other hand, Hillary goes to her friend's party, and when she leaves, Will makes his entrance and asks Hillary for money since he's in trouble now. She doesn't have any. Then it turns out one of the members from the pool hall has followed Will home. Now Uncle Phil returns and Will tells him everything about the situation. While there is a short moment of anger, Uncle Phil heads to the pool hall and wins the match against the guy who beat Will with a bet of $100 per ball. They return home and meet Vivian, who has returned from her trip, and in the end, we learn about the brand new side of Uncle Phil, who was a secret pool player in his prime. The second season kicks off with Will sharing a heartfelt conversation, but the conversation doesn't hide the chaos behind his back. Meanwhile, Will has fallen in love with a woman named Kathleen, and he's taking all of the time off the telephone. At night, Ashley and Hillary tell everyone that Phil has bought tickets for everyone to visit People's Choice Awards. However, this is not the same for Jeffrey, as he has no tickets for himself. After a drastic dinner with Kathleen, everyone gets ready for the awards, and Phil gets Jeffrey a ticket as well. Will looks like he's cosplaying himself from Men in Black, but better. While the kids go to the awards with Jeffrey, Kathleen and Will have their time of their lives in the storeroom. But suddenly, an earthquake shakes everything up and kicks in Will's phobias. Meanwhile, in the lawyer's office, Phil and Vivian enjoy their good time together, and Will is still in a state of shock, unable to do anything. When Will finds out everything that Kathleen wears is fake, he makes fun of her, enough to scream loudly right when Phil and Vivian arrive home after the earthquake. They try to figure out where the scream came from, and they get into the storeroom, which makes Kathleen free, and she leaves. However, when Phil asks if something happened between these two, Will says something indeed has happened, but it wasn't anything but a lover's quarrel. At the end of the episode, Will leaves the storeroom to talk with his mother. Aunt Vivian takes some time off at home until suddenly everyone arrives from their school and the whole house turns into nothing but a ball of chaos. At night, Ashley gets a high fever, but her parents recognize that she's faking it because of her test. However, when Will checks on her, she reveals about the bully who takes her lunch, and Will tries to teach her some self-defense. When Carlton enters the room, he tells Will that violence entails violence. This doesn't stop Will, and he continues to teach her, implying it's for self-defense, something that everyone should know. The next day, Ashley challenges her bully Paula. But to even the odds, Will and Carlton arrive to her help. However, things get heated, but Will bribes her to shut her up. At home, Vivian worries for Ashley as she has been to school and knows what happened. And when she enters home, Vivian confronts her about it. Ashley reveals to Phil and Vivian about Paula, and they call her parents to their home to discuss this matter. The Hoover family arrives, and they talk with Ashley's parents. At the end, Ashley and Paula decide to end their rivalry as there is a misunderstanding. But the situation with their parents gets heated, so much so that Phil punches Mr. Hoover in the face. In the end, when Paula's parents leave, they call Ashley and tell her that she should never hit someone, even if it feels nice. The next morning, Will crispy fries his shorts in an oven, as his working class ass mistakes the high class oven for a washing machine. Will tries to fund the homecoming party, but it will cost more than a fortune. So he decides to ask Uncle Phil for help by complimenting his impossible weight loss. This flutters Phil, but then Will tells him the real reason why he's being so nice. Uncle Phil approves and decides to write him a check. Uncle Phil accidentally calls Will Carlton a few times, and it raises a certain concern for him. He explains this to Jeffrey, but instead of helping him, he makes him a happy sandwich. The night arrives, and when the family is about to leave for the party, Will rants to Uncle Phil about likening him to Carlton. But when they leave, Will calls his now girlfriend to give him company. Meanwhile, Ashley plays with her friend Tina, and Carlton crashes their party. When Tina leaves the room, Will enters and reveals to Ashley that he has found a job. Carlton forces Tina to leave the house, but Vivian stops her for dinner. After a few moments, Phil and Vivian receive a letter about how Will has been missing classes, and they confront him. Will fails to answer, and Uncle Phil grounds him. Vivian cheers him up, and they go to a restaurant, where Will is dressed up as a pirate waiter, and he serves the family. However, Will gets a little rude, and when Uncle Phil tries to talk it out, Will reveals himself, and his uncle apologizes for acting rudely today. In the end, Will is left with a lesson on how a man should stand up on his own, but that it's also okay to get help to succeed, and he tries more to become like his uncle. Will makes himself at home, literally at his uncle's house, until Vivian and Phil return home and he tries to clear his mess out of the main hall. But Phil gets caught up in this mess, and a few moments later, a butler friend of Jeffrey, Cecil, comes to the house to meet with him. Will meets the deadbeat butler party and gets on to watch his game, while Carlton tells him to study for PSATs. While they argue, Phil gets ready for his office on the weekend, and he and Vivian discuss Joffrey's annual raise. In the morning, Will gets to his usual shenanigans, but Phil stops him and asks if he has prepared for the test. He stays quiet and they leave. After the kids leave for school, Phil announces the raise to Joffrey, and he leaves the room dissatisfied. The next day, the results come, and due to an error, Carlton thinks that he has topped the exam, but somehow the topper is Will, and he continues to troll the little fella until Joffrey quits his job. Carlton's torment continues until he loses it, but the next day, he figures out something in the class, and the teacher announces a pop quiz. Carlton sweats it and gets caught cheating with Will. Both of them are thrown into the principal office, but when their name gets cleared, Carlton blows the cover, and then at home, Phil and Vivian ground both of them again. After a few moments, Joffrey finally returns, and they decide to give him superior pay, and Phil apologizes for his behavior. In the end, Will and Carlton make up, and they continue to strengthen their not-so-brotherly relationship. Continuing the show, Will makes a video for his mother as she has finally bought a VCR. Aunt Vivian records him to send a video to his mother, and he shows off his growth at the Banks household so far. In the afternoon, Ashley, Hillary, Carlton, and Will get into an argument about how good they can do their opposite gender activities, and they challenge each other for it. Meanwhile, Uncle Phil arrives and tells everyone how he wants his mother to move in with them since his father passed away a year ago, so that she doesn't feel lonely. When everyone leaves the kitchen, Phil's acquaintance, Ed, tries to cheer up Grandma with his cheesy lines, and it seems to work on her. In the night, Will and Carlton try to make a dress for the bet, but when Uncle Phil and Grandma see them, it creates an absurd atmosphere. The next night, Uncle Phil introduces Miss Sweetings to his mother, and they get familiar. In the middle of the night, Vivian tries to heat things up with Phil, but they see a note on their bed from Phil's mother. Ain't no stronger boner killer. Phil kinda gets a hunch for something. When he goes to the kitchen, he sees her mother kissing Ed, which ruins his mind for the next whole day, and he vents to Vivian. Vivian asks him to invite Ed to dinner, but this idea turns into chaos, and in the end, Uncle Phil confronts his mother. She explains how his father promised her that he would never leave, but that did not last forever. Phil apologizes and they hug. The next day, the battle between the girls and boys is over, and in the end, Ashley and Hillary take their victory as Carlton's dress is hilarious.
Hey man, you gonna let them talk to you like that?
Yeah, I kinda like it.
At the household, Will's mother has arrived to stay for a few days and shows her obsessive side towards her son as he studies. Everyone in the household is preparing for the upcoming wedding of Vivian's baby sister. Vivian's third sister arrives at the house, and her kids are worse than Carlton and Hillary combined. At last, the baby sister, Aunt Janice, arrives at the house on a flight, and all of the sisters are happy to reunite after a long time. Carlton sleeps with Will as his room is full, and their conversation goes into the topic of marriage. Will says he will never do it, and they fall asleep. The next day, Frank, Aunt Janice's husband-to-be, arrives, and when the driver enters the room, they mistake him for Frank, until the real Frank walks in and Janice kisses him. Suddenly, the family turns against the marriage as Frank is white. At night, the sisters talk it out with Janice since the society sees black people as a minority, but Janice says that they can handle everything, so they should not really worry about her. The day of the wedding arrived, and Will gets ready, but his mother stops him from going to the wedding.
I already told you, you're not going to that wedding.
Well, come on, look, Mom, I have to go. I can't disappoint Aunt Jay.
Will explains to his mother how even if she loves or raises everyone, she shouldn't have control over anyone's life. After a few moments, the wedding starts, and when Will's mother arrives from behind, the ceremony stops, but she finally has a change of mind, and in the end, she supports their wedding. In the next episode, Ashley talks to Will when he's doing a fake dumbbell press, while she talks about cheerleading. Will supports her idea to join the cheerleaders and tells her how he used to be one of them. It's Vivian's birthday today, so Phil decides to throw a party, but Vivian thinks she has become a lot older now. Meanwhile, Carlton and Will get ready in the hall, and Ashley tells Will that she has signed up for cheerleading. At the restaurant's lounge, the family arrives, and after dinner, they go to the main hall where everyone is shown a sight of Vivian's life from birth to where she stands today and wishes her a great happy birthday. Until suddenly the fire alarm breaks out and everyone is wet. The next day at home, everyone thinks Vivian's mood is gloomy due to yesterday's events, but she's all happy and lively as she has joined the dance classes. Will drives her to the dance class, and for him, it's heaven on earth where angels do splits, but for Vivian, she did not last even an hour. They return home, and after Phil understands how her class is, he gives the family trip tickets to Hawaii. But Vivian is against them, as there is an audition coming up. 3 weeks later, the audition has arrived, and Vivian leaves for the class, but some people make fun of her since she missed classes. But when it's time for the audition, Vivian nails it, and she returns home to tell her family about getting the lead role. Before going to sleep, he tells Vivian how beautiful she is, and they dance. In the end, Ashley arrives, and she tells her parents how Will's cheering got her to pass the audition in cheerleading too. Later on, Vivian loses her earring, and Phil helps her to find it in such a position that boggles Will's mind. Later, when he gets down to the hall, he reveals that he wore the earring to school today and runs away. Meanwhile, tonight is a Lakers game at the NBA, and Will receives a ticket from Uncle Phil, while the other ticket is for his colleague's daughter. She is huge, so Will tells her he cannot drive her to the game since his car is houseful, so he will see her at the game. After the game, Will goes to Uncle Phil's room and tells him about the game, and Uncle Phil asks if Denise, the daughter of his colleague, asked them out for a dance. Will hesitates, and the next day Denise arrives at home and they talk about their movie tastes. When things start to heat up between them, Will swoops away from the kitchen, and later they go to a restaurant for a girlfriend date. But things stir up as Will's friend oddly compliments Denise's body, and she leaves. The dance party comes close, and Carlton gets dumped by his so-called date, and he goes alone while getting hand in hand with Claudia. Meanwhile, Carlton is stuck with his school friends. On the other hand, when Claudia goes to the bathroom, Will sees Denise at the party and tries to smooth things out with her, but he fails. However, their mutual activity of putting chopsticks in their noses helps them to reunite and they dance. In the end, Denise and Will return home, and they watch a movie with the whole family on a single bed. Carlton makes his not-so-dramatic entry where he complains about how bad his night was. The fresh new third season starts with the kids on summer vacation, and Will in Philadelphia at his mom's. Uncle Phil and Aunt Vivian are as lively as ever until Uncle Phil mentions sending Will to a boarding school, and they reach a disagreement. When they go to the kitchen, all the kids return home from their summer vacation. To Phil's and Vivian's surprise, Will has brought a beeper to keep in touch with his sugar mommies, but they do not allow him to keep a beeper in the house. Will tries to persuade them, but Uncle Phil's brain is about to explode, and he goes away with Ashley and Hillary. At night, Uncle Phil hosts a party for the clients, and when Ashley arrives, Will's jeans are getting to her, and her parents tell her to change the dress. On the other hand, when Will arrives, he wears an even more ridiculous outfit, and his beeper causes an immense moment of distraction, which causes Uncle Phil to lash out, and Will decides to leave the house. Will goes to Jazz's place, but he kicks him out as he is busy getting busy. Damn, whatever happened to bros before hoes? After lurking in the streets for a while, Will tries to mess with a car and, of course, gets arrested. Everyone in the house worries about Will until the police officer gets him home, and they all explain their disappointment in him. So Will tries to clear his path by talking it out with Uncle Phil with the help of his kids, and he somehow wins the agreement of free will. However, in the end, Uncle Phil says if Will wants to express himself, all of his kids, including will stay grounded, and his kids follow Will to get everything off of him. In the next episode, everyone is busy with their own thing in the kitchen, and Uncle Phil announces that the family will help build the old neighborhood. A few moments later, Uncle Phil finds out Vivian ignores him, but for the reason that he has become predictable. Both Uncle Phil and Will try to cheer Vivian up, but they fail. The day of rebuilding arrives, and everyone is hard at work except Will and Carlton, who fail to get a date there too. However, Carlton uses his great sense of humor, and it works like a charm. While watching them, Vivian continues to ignore Phil, and the situation escalates. After the convention, Noah and Will clear out the area, but they get into a bit of a disagreement, and Jazz leaves. Suddenly, a crazy man arrives and threatens Will until Uncle Phil shows up, and it turns out it's Hector, his long-lost friend, and everyone is happy to meet him again. After the family catches up with Hector, they reminisce about the time they spent in their old apartment. In the end, the kids leave Uncle Phil and Vivian alone, and they finally make up. Vivian tells Phil not to feel guilty about his success, and Vivian reveals that they now have another baby coming soon. The next day, Uncle Phil gets all excited for his next baby and makes a recording. He calls all of his kids down and tells them about the surprise, but none of them take it seriously. After a while, Uncle Phil tells Vivian the do's and don'ts while he keeps eating the food himself. When Hillary comes into the kitchen, her parents tell her to move out when the baby comes. She tries to talk it out, but they do not listen to her. She leaves, and Ashley gets ready for her first day at Carlton's school. She decides to hang out with Will until she makes friends. At school, Will tries to make another date named Veronica and fails. And on the other hand, Carlton gets pushed into the lockers by a girl. When they return home, they tell Uncle Phil the girl's story, and he tells them about his times in school. But Vivian shuts down his old love stories. The next day at school, Will and Carlton tried their generic thing with the girls again, but suddenly the room turns hot as Ashley catches everyone's attention. Meanwhile, Hillary tricks her parents into letting her live in the pool house, and they forcefully agree. At school, Carlton's friend gets him on another girl and leaves Ashley in the dust, which makes Will tell her to wait for the right boy to come along. Ashley becomes happy, and Will finally gets a chance to date Veronica, and this time, he nails it. Will comes into the kitchen while Uncle Phil and Vivian share a moment of relevance to their baby, and Uncle Phil once again tells him about his influence on Ashley. But Will thinks he has saved Ashley, and when Uncle Phil tries to deny it, he learns how his other kids only care about money. Moments later, Hillary tells him she will go shopping on her own, and Uncle Phil becomes happy. But she just opens up the freezer and takes everything from there, which makes Phil tell her to get a job. Will tunes the TV to see the news, and when he sees a black man rapping like they always do, he becomes tired of the stereotype. The next day, Will goes to a news channel to help Hillary get a job, but instead, Will tries to persuade them to be on the news for his favorite topic. They decline, and the reporter becomes interested in Hillary instead. Will returns home and tells how the reporters declined his message offer because he's just black, and it makes Uncle Phil angry. But when he learns Hillary got a job, he becomes all lovey-dovey. When Will drops Hillary at the channel station, he persuades them once again, and he gets the time to air his opinion on a political matter. When Hillary gives out the ridiculous weather updates, Will makes his entrance and tells everyone to sign a petition for Los Angeles' benefit. Suddenly, the police chase him away, and in the end, Will congratulates Hillary for her job at night. In the next episode, Carlton gets ready to meet his ex-girlfriend, Cindy, who everyone thought dumped Carlton, but when she enters the house, she brings a baby, whose father is supposedly Carlton. Everyone passes the baby around until Uncle Phil and Vivian walk in, and Carlton falls unconscious when his parents know about the situation. Uncle Phil doesn't believe that it's his child, so they decide to keep Cindy at home while the blood tests arrive. After Uncle Phil fails to reach Cindy's parents, Vivian asks Carlton how he would manage food and teaching his kids. And when he asks his parents to do that, they become really angry and he runs away with Will. Before the situation gets even worse, Carlton jumps from the window, but Will confronts him and he reveals how he will now go to a chapel to elope with Cindy. The next day, Uncle Phil and Vivian find out about Carlton's disappearance, and they ask Will about it. However, he denies any relation to the situation, and they decide to call Carlton's friends while he is now at his wedding ceremony. Now, Will tries to find her, and when he enters the right chapel, he finds out that Cindy left as her parents came to get her, and she reveals that he never slept with her. So he's still a cherry boy. In the end, Will tries to cheer him up and takes him home so he can get into trouble. At school, Will is invited to the Lakers game by a girl who looks like a walking nerd emoji. He turns her down first. However, to not make her that sad, Will tells her to at least unroll her hair buns for tonight. At home, everyone has their everyday moments, until the bell rings and the girl, Lindsay, arrives and everyone greets her, except Will. He asks what she's doing here, and she tells him to spend another night with her. When he disagrees, she gives him a gold watch. While Will flexes his handmade gold watch to Carlton, who has a measly Casio, Uncle Phil tells everyone to sit quietly as someone who made him the man he stands today, Judge Robertson, will arrive soon. The judge arrives and he greets everyone, but after dinner, Vivian finds his attitude to be eccentric, as he is a womanizer, and Uncle Phil drops him in his car. The next day, Will receives a Harley Davidson from Lindsay as a dating token, but when he takes it, Aunt Vivian tells him to return it and be honest with her. However, Will acts like a pimp and keeps the bike. The family watches the old picture album until Judge Robertson arrives again and Phil asks him to retire for good. This breaks out in an argument and Robertson leaves until he arrives from the back door and gives Will a peace of mind about Lindsay's issue. Suddenly, Lindsay also arrives, but Will breaks out and asks if she cares about him as a person. Lindsay asks him to return everything she gave him, and in the end, Will tells the judge about his love for the watch she gave him, and not for her. In this episode, Jazz is at the house and returns Will's CD player to him, but it's broken. After a moment, Uncle Phil tells everyone at the house that he's running for Supreme Judge, and he wants everyone to look great. Meanwhile, Jazz has destroyed Will's coat too, and he doesn't know what to wear now. Everyone's ready except Will, and Judge Robertson makes his entry when Uncle Phil tells him that he's running against them for the position of the judge, and he becomes angry. Either way, they go to the convention, and Uncle Phil gives a speech about his candidacy, and Judge Robertson vouches for him. Suddenly, police arrive, and for some reason, they arrest Will. After they take him to the station, Uncle Phil becomes his attorney, and he reveals his $2,000 parking tickets. However, he fails to recognize them and blames it on his best friend, Jazz. A few moments later, they return to the city hall, and when Uncle Phil talks with Robertson, he reveals that he is the one to expose his tickets, as Phil has reached the big leagues now. They return home, and Will meets Jazz. He explains the meaning of friendship and tells him to get out. Will tries to get along with everyone in the family, but they're busy, and he remembers his best friend Jazz. Will tries to talk it out with Uncle Phil, but he suddenly says he's not mad anymore, and Jazz makes his entry. Jazz shares his concerns about Will getting into college, and that he will miss him. However, in the end, Will tries to keep up with his emotions until he throws him out of the house. The votes day draws near, and Uncle Phil has made a commercial for his campaign. Since Will is in charge of the commercial, he makes it super funky, which causes Uncle Phil to throw him out of the house. The next day, Will tries to cheer Uncle Phil up by saying someone liked his commercial. And later, Hillary arrives with her boss, Trevor, who invites all of the family for a night with Oprah. However, Oprah only wants the immediate family, so Will is not allowed. Uncle Phil asks Vivian to break the news to Will, but she fails. And when he tries to do it himself, he sees Will all excited and decides to delay the news till the flight. However, the delay keeps delaying, and they actually arrive at Oprah Winfrey's show. A few moments later at the set, they finally meet Oprah, and when the time for the show starts, Uncle Phil finally reveals everything to Will. The show begins, and Oprah welcomes the Banks family and Senator Lloyd. Meanwhile, Will sits in the crowd and asks questions from Senator's family if he would let his nephew be on the show, and he replies yes. This makes Will really angry, and he asks Uncle Phil to do the same thing. This circle of madness continues when Oprah makes a guess that Will is related to the Banks family, and she asks him to get on the stage to be with his family. However, this backfires as everyone in the crowd thinks that Uncle Phil is not suitable to be the judge since he cannot even run his own home. But when his kids try to cover him up, they get caught in the crossfire as they don't have enough brains to tell the rights and wrongs. The show becomes a mess, and when someone comments on the family, Will beats him up. After the show, Will apologizes to Oprah, but she says that she had fun and gives him 2 tickets for the Donahue show. Everyone returns home after a massacre of a show, and the poll results are now up. In the end, unfortunately, Uncle Phil loses the campaign, and Senator Lloyd wins. And in the fresh start of Season 4, Uncle Phil tries to interact with his newborn child, but doesn't get a welcoming response, making him think that his weirdness might be the issue. Soon after, Jazz makes an appearance and brings a gift for the newborn baby. While Vivian seems to like it very much, Will isn't much of a fan and ultimately throws it out of the window. Later, he receives a call from his mother, talking about him starting college, which results in both of them getting emotional. After, Hillary appears wearing a wedding dress and informs everyone that she will be getting married to Trevor, as he plans to propose to her while bungee jumping on his TV news show. Vivian is overjoyed and goes to prepare the invitation list with Hillary. That being said, Will and Carlton move to their new apartment, and Carlton informs Will about his interaction with a girl who is looking forward to seeing him again. Back at the Banks mansion, Ashley brings home a boy whom she met in the mall. However, it doesn't end well as Uncle Phil scares the poor guy away. Will and Carlton are having a get-together with friends to celebrate their moving out when a couple of strangers walk in. Jazz took $25 from random people and invited them to the party that was going on at their new place. Will forces them to leave, and they end up taking some home appliances to make up for the $25 they just lost. Will and Carlton face the consequences of their out-of-control party. Their landlord evicts them after the apartment is left in shambles, and they're forced to move back in with Uncle Phil and Vivian. The two are disappointed and embarrassed, but they try to make the best of the situation. Will is particularly frustrated, feeling like he's taken a step backward in his journey towards independence. Meanwhile, Hillary is shocked when her boyfriend, Trevor, proposes to her on live television. Despite her initial excitement, she begins to have doubts about marrying him. Will tries to offer some advice, but his own love life is in disarray. He's struggling to navigate his feelings for Jackie and isn't sure if he's ready for a serious relationship. Carlton offers his unique brand of advice, which only seems to confuse Hillary even further. Hillary's doubts about Trevor continue to grow, and she begins to question whether she's truly ready for marriage. Back at the college, Will is ready to take his first psychology class and doesn't realize that the person he is messing with is actually his course teacher, Jeremy. After the first class, Will doesn't seem to like it and plans on dropping it. The next day, Will goes to Jeremy and asks him to sign the paper, which will allow him to drop out. After successfully dropping out, Will realizes that Jeremy is actually a chill dude, and his way of teaching seems interesting to him. However, Jeremy doesn't want Will in his class anymore and kicks him out. Later, Uncle Phil visits Will and is not happy about hearing about Will dropping out of Western psychology class. Will didn't look worried at all, which made Uncle Phil disappointed enough to leave. Later that day, Will went to Jeremy and told him that he had changed from the person he was yesterday and wanted to re-enter his class. Unluckily, Will has no chance now, as some other student has already taken a spot. The only offer Jeremy could give Will is to take his class without any credits. This would mean that they would have to pick one extra class to make up for the credit. Eventually, Will accepts the offer and now is back in Jeremy's class. Uncle Phil and Vivian plan to go to lunch and leave Nikki at home, asking Hillary to take care of him. Later that day, Will is working at the college cafeteria when he notices the single dad getting attention from all the girls. Soon after, Hillary arrives and leaves Nikki in Will's care, claiming that taking care of him is too tall of a task for her. This results in him getting all the attention from girls as well. Uncle Phil and Vivian finally return home from their lunch and realize that the baby is not where they left him. Fortunately, Will and Carlton arrive and bring the baby along. Carlton confronts Will for lying through his teeth about the baby, but Will doesn't seem to care. The next morning, Will starts getting even more attention from the girls as everyone thinks of him as a single, hard-working dad. Jackie also visits him and shows him his picture in the newspaper, calling him Father of the Year. After returning home, Will asks Uncle Phil and Vivian to go out and enjoy themselves so that he can have Nikki for himself. At the school cafeteria, an interviewer arrives and starts asking Will about his story being a single hardworking father. Uncle Phil, who is watching TV from his hotel room, is surprised to see Will act like his child's father. After hearing his story, the interviewer ends up giving Will a lot of gifts, including a trip to Hawaii. In the middle of the interview, Jackie visits them and exposes his act to the interviewer. Will eventually confesses and gives all the gifts he received to the actual single father at their college, only to find out that he wasn't actually the father of that child either. A girl named Joanne visits the cafeteria and Will encourages Carlton to go ask her out, as he won't be getting many chances to be with a girl this beautiful. Carlton listens to his advice and surprisingly ends up landing himself a date. On the other hand, the ethics committee seems to be digging up the dirt on all the judges in town, which scares Uncle Phil as the smallest misdemeanor can cost him his job. He then makes sure to not do anything stupid from now on, asking Will to do the same. Call it a hunch, but this seems like a big mistake. After Carlton's date ends, Joanne brings him to a hotel room and invites him inside. The next morning, he joyfully arrives back home and informs Will about how he finally graduated from being a cherry boy. Later that day, Jeffrey confessed to a crime that he committed and shows them a video, informing them about the time that he cheated in the Olympics. Instead of being furious at him, the whole house started laughing at Jeffrey, letting him know that what he did couldn't be considered a crime. At night, there is a party at the cafeteria, and Will asks Carlton to go and talk to Mr. Morgan, a man who could raise his chances of getting into Princeton. However, their interaction turns to be traumatizing for Carlton as he finds out that Joanne is Morgan's wife, and she only used them for a one-night stand. Damn, the plot just thickened. Will asks Uncle Phil to fix their air conditioning, but he only agrees to do it if Will pays him the rent first. Will eventually gives up arguing and plans on taking over the poolside instead. However, Uncle Phil refuses to let him use the pool as no rent means no facilities. Nonetheless, they don't care and end up throwing a pool party anyway. Meanwhile, Uncle Phil is watching his daughter on the TV when Joffrey arrives and informs Uncle Phil about the pool party taking place inside his house. This makes Uncle Phil furious, and he goes out to confront the boys for disobeying him. Uncle Phil gives Will one last warning and asks him to make everyone leave when he returns. The next morning, Jeffrey lets the boys know that Uncle Phil has arranged a court session to solve the rent issue once and for all. Later that day, all three of them gather at the court and Will puts forward his first witness, Carlton. However, he doesn't have any idea about what to say and doesn't contribute anything to the case. Will's next witness is Hillary, and she starts explaining everything she and Trevor used to do at the poolside, making everyone interrupt her confessions. Lastly, both of the parties explain to the judge their point of view, and Uncle Phil goes first. In his mind, he talked to the boys as respectfully as possible, but the boys told the judge the opposite. In the end, the judge decides the air conditioning is considered a luxury, and Will have to pay the rent. The next episode, Hillary informs the whole family that she has been invited to a Playboy magazine photo shoot. But Uncle Phil refuses to let her go and doesn't plan to change his mind. This results in Hillary arguing with Uncle Phil about how he never treats her like an adult. Later that day, Will discusses the Playboy shoot with Jackie, and their discussion transitions into the two of them planning to go out on a lunch date. After returning home, Hillary informs Will that the Playboy will be having a pool party before the shoot, and she's willing to take Will along. At the same time, Jackie calls Will asking him about their lunch date. Will ends up making an excuse and acts as if he is bedridden, not being able to move. Just when Hillary and Will are about to leave, Carlton arrives and plans to tag along as well. Later that day, Uncle Phil asks Jeffrey about the kids, and he ends up spilling the beans. Meanwhile, Will tries hitting on every girl he sees, but fails every time. Uncle Phil arrives at the Playboy mansion and has a talk with Mr. Hefner, talking about how he doesn't seem comfortable having his daughter in such shoots. Back at home, Vivian explains to Uncle Phil that a parent must step back sometimes and let their children find their own way. Uncle Phil agrees to that and doesn't charge Hillary when she returns home. A few days later, Will shows Uncle Phil all the photos of Hillary, and he is glad to see that her body was mostly covered. Uncle Phil's doctor pays him a visit and advises him to cut off some food and focus on dieting a bit. Ashley decides to take the doctor's advice really seriously and drains down Uncle Phil's food, asking Joffrey to make something lighter for her dad. Sometime after, Joffrey brings Uncle Phil some salad and offers to give him some salad if he agrees to pay the price. Unfortunately, Ashley arrives at that exact moment and catches her dad trying to eat junk food. Uncle Phil then visits the lounge, only to realize that the exercise equipment has taken the place of the couch. Having no other choice, Uncle Phil bribes Will, promising to sponsor his trip to Mexico if he secretly brings him some junk food. Will agrees and brings him junk food for a whole week, until it finally catches up to Uncle Phil and he has a serious heart attack. Uncle Phil is taken to a hospital and Will finally confesses to the things he had been doing. The next day, Will notices that Carlton hasn't visited Uncle Phil and suggests he take care of his father and be grateful that he is still a part of his life. He agrees and pays his pops a visit and his apologies for not coming sooner, and lets Uncle Phil know that he is scared to see his dad suffer. Uncle Phil apologizes to him as well, promising to never put himself in such spots. And Season 5 opens with Will congratulating Uncle Phil for investing in a record store, and later the whole family goes to take a look at their dad's new investment. Will ends up liking it a lot and asks Uncle Phil to let him work there. However, Uncle Phil is aware of his skills and refuses right away. Just then, Will heard Ashley singing on her own, and her beautiful voice grabbed his attention along with a few other customers at the store. After coming home, he made everyone hear her voice, but Uncle Phil refused to let his daughter step into the music field as education is more important for her. Later that day, Will visits Barry, one of the best music producers, but finds out that even he isn't allowed to step into his room. However, he doesn't give up and manages to sneak inside, but Barry rejects his offer and makes him go away. Will then visits a radio station and manages to play Ashley's song on live radio. Barry ends up liking the voice he heard and asks for a live show. Will arranges a little concert for Ashley, and her voice catches Barry off guard. So much so, he makes a deal worth $30,000. Uncle Phil still isn't in favor of her joining the music industry, but eventually agrees to let her, and Vivian ends up becoming her manager. A few days have passed and Ashley's music career has been going great. Will rents out his own office, where Barry and a few more guys pay him a visit to discuss Ashley's future plans. As expected, Will totally fumbles the meeting, leaving Barry unsatisfied with it. Will then ends up catching Ashley singing in a studio without his knowledge, and turns out that another manager has been hired for Ashley who is apparently better at the job. Shockingly, Uncle Phil always knew about this and never told Will, which resulted in a serious argument between the two. Will decides to leave his home and starts living in the office until the landlord kicks him out. After returning home, Will notices that Ashley has become a completely different person and has Carlton dancing on her fingers. Afterward, Will confronts Ashley for firing him, to which Ashley replies that she would have been happy paying him salary while someone else did the job. This statement makes him even more furious, and Will storms away, claiming that he was the one who made Ashley. He then started looking for hidden talent in order to find himself a new singer, but failed to do so. Carlton pays Will a visit and informs him that he was fired by Ashley as well. On the other hand, it is Ashley's first single release, and not a single person pays them a visit. Turns out that the public got sick of hearing Ashley's songs and started taking an interest in other stuff. After coming back home, Will makes fun of Ashley, but the two of them eventually make up, each admitting their own mistakes. Will takes Nikki to a show that features his favorite character, Dougie the Whale. During the show, Dougie the Whale suddenly stops and starts arguing with his team, eventually canceling the show. Seeing this makes Will annoyed, and he decides to have a word with Dougie, asking Carlton to take care of Nikki. Turns out Dougie is really rude in person. He starts a fight with Will, and Will throws some hands as well. He was quick with the slaps even back in the day.
Bruh.
Unfortunately, Nikki ends up witnessing Will beating Dougie and stops talking to him. From that day forward, Nikki starts getting more and more closer to Carlton, while completely ignoring Will like he doesn't even exist. Nikki's nursery teacher suggests apologizing to Dougie the Whale in front of Nikki, but turns out that the guy has already left the job. After returning home, Will discusses this with Uncle Phil and tells him how bad he is with kids. However, Uncle Phil thinks otherwise and lets Will know that he would make a great father, as everyone makes mistakes in the start. With that being said, Will decides to tell Nikki the truth, and just when he is about to expose the Santa for being fake, he notices a girl and ends up following her to a room where a so-called Santa is present. Santa advises him not to take away Nikki's innocence and to let him believe in those secrets. Furthermore, he tells Will that Nikki won't be mad at him forever and will eventually forgive him. Will asks his crush, Valerie, to hang out, but she refuses because of her plans with her cousin, Karen. This gives him an idea, and Will suggests bringing Karen to their house so they can enjoy a double date with Carlton present. Additionally, Ashley finally got her permit and is excited to go out and drive with Uncle Phil. Later that day, Valerie and Karen finally arrive, and all four of them start enjoying a movie. For some reason, Will and Karen leave for a second, leaving Valerie and Carlton alone. When Will comes back, he catches the two of them kissing, which results in Will getting mad at him. Carlton tries to explain himself, but Will refuses to listen to anything and decides not to talk to him for the time being. The two of them start arguing in front of Uncle Phil, and he advises burying the cause in the hatchet, but they refuse. Finally, Carlton has enough, and he lets Will know that Valerie is most likely bored with him and decides to come to him. This statement kicks off a fight between the two, and Carlton's knee accidentally hits Will, making him lose consciousness. While Will is unconscious, he dreams of the two of them still knowing each other on their deathbed, making him realize that their bond is much stronger to be broken by a random girl. Will, Carlton, and Jazz are playing poker, and the two of them find out that Jazz has been cheating all along. They decide to take revenge by telling him a false story about a homicide. Will starts off the story by letting him know that the Master Chief of the place he worked at ended up being eliminated by the Man in Black. He was later captured by the police, and Will successfully told the police everything about him. However, he somehow managed to escape, and the police put Will and his family in a witness protection center in Alabama. The whole Banks family is furious at Will for letting the Man in Black escape, due to which they had to relocate to the slums. In order to find some food, Will, along with Carlton and Uncle Phil, had to hike to the nearest town, where they ran into a bear. Luckily, a girl scared it off and fell in love with Will, closing the deal with a forced kiss. That girl later came to their house with her father, who had a shotgun in his hands. She accused Will of making her pregnant, and Will managed to calm down the situation by agreeing to an engagement party. After the party is over, the man in black shows up once again, and by this time, Jazz realizes that the two of them were messing around. At night, the man in black pays Will a visit in real life, and he freaks out just to later realize that it was Jazz taking his revenge. Will scores a date with Lisa, a woman who turns out to be a part of a sorority that holds misandrist beliefs, considering men inferior. Lisa's sorority sisters, finding Will disrespectful, decide to teach him a lesson. They invite Will to their sorority house, where Lisa and her friends tie him to a chair. Okay, off to a good start. Will then manages to escape by burning through the ropes using a candle. Upon freeing himself, he discovers that Carlton was behind the prank, as Lisa reveals that Carlton and the sorority wanted to teach Will a lesson about respecting women. Seeking revenge, Will decides to pay a prank on Carlton. He tricks Carlton into thinking he accidentally eliminated Lisa by dropping a rock on her head. Carlton, believing he has committed a serious crime, panics and runs around the set screaming in various locations, including the home, the academy, the audience, and the cameras. Ashley lets Will know that she dropped out of Bel-Air Academy and has been going to a public school since the beginning of the semester. Apparently, her homeroom teacher wants to meet Ashley's parents and wants to meet them tonight, as she has already canceled the meeting 5 times. Eventually, Will decides to help her out and disguises himself as Ashley's father. The homeroom teacher catches Will's eye and he starts flirting with her instead of paying attention to the actual reason she called him. Finally, the meeting is over and Ashley drags him outside. However, Will, thinking he has a chance with the teacher, goes back in and tries to shoot his shot. That is when the teacher notices his mustache being fake and realizes that Will is not Ashley's real father. Having no other choice, Ashley is forced to tell her parents the truth. Apparently, Ashley wants to study at a public school and experience the so-called real life instead of the one in private schools. The next day, her homeroom teacher visits their house to meet the real father. She leaves a detailed magazine about all the stuff that takes place at their public school, hoping that Uncle Phil might change his mind after giving it a read. The next morning, Uncle Phil tells Ashley that he has made an appointment at the public school and will take a look at everything they offer. If he is satisfied with the things he sees, Uncle Phil promises to allow her to study there. Then, Uncle Phil and Vivian get a special invitation to the 25th anniversary of Soul Train. Uncle Phil proposed to Vivian on this famous music and dance TV show almost 20 years ago. But Uncle Phil feels unsure about going because he's worried he might not dance as well as he used to. Uncle Phil doesn't want to admit his fears, so he tells Vivian he has an important work meeting instead. Meanwhile, Will and Carlton learn about the significance of Soul Train and Uncle Phil and Vivian's love story. They plan to surprise them by reenacting the proposal on the show's stage. However, Will and Carlton accidentally ruin the surprise before the event. Despite this, Uncle Phil and Vivian are touched by the gesture and decide to go to the Soul Train anniversary together. They see it as a chance to relive their happy memories and celebrate their lasting love. Will and Lisa are hanging out at a bowling alley. Will goes to take his turn when a creep arrives and tries to hit on Lisa. Will tries to make him go away, which results in him getting beaten to a pulp. Luckily, Lisa manages to subdue him using the self-defense skills she learned a few years ago. After the incident, Will starts acting weird, constantly doubting himself and letting Lisa know that he could have taken care of it. Nonetheless, he decides to take some lessons from the Shotokan karate master, who first teaches him the art of discipline. Afterward, he has a conversation with Jazz, and they decide to put on a fake robbery act where Will can redeem himself in front of Lisa. The next day, both of them are hanging out in a store when an armed robber arrives. Will, who isn't aware that he is the real deal and not the person Jazz hired, goes to confront him. He manages to steal his gun and lands a series of punches on the robber, eventually making him lose consciousness. Everyone praises him for his bravery except for Lisa, who thought of it as a foolish move as he could have met his demise, confronting an armed man. In the end, Will ends up telling Lisa the truth about everything and she ends up forgiving him. In Season 5 finale, Will decides it's time to get a job and gets interested in journalism. He comes up with an idea for a book called Celebrities' Houses at Night. He pitches it to a publisher, and to make his pitch more interesting, he takes photos of celebrities. One of the photos accidentally makes it look like Jay Leno is dumping something into the water, but the editor Will meets with works for a gossip magazine and twists the photo to make it seem like Jay is polluting. The editor blames Will for the story. Jay Leno gets upset and decides to sue Will for saying something false about him. Without money from Uncle Phil for court, Will has to figure out what to do. So he decides to go on Jay Leno's show and publicly apologize. Going into season 6, in the first episode, Uncle Phil nags Will about how he's wasting his summer break, whereas his cousin Carlton is off to a summer camp. Will is actually quite bored due to absence of his cousin, although he tries his hardest to hide this fact. But this boredom will soon throw a wrench into the dinner party the family is hosting tonight, and to none other than Judge Walker. Later, there is no one to stop him from dumping half the bottle of liquor into the pot, which, when lit, ends up setting the entire kitchen ablaze. Amid this panic, Will receives a phone call from Carlton, and he babbles out his current situation to him. Now, Carlton is on a mission to reach home as fast as possible, but ultimately fails because he forgot his wallet, and now he has to hitchhike his way back. Meanwhile, Uncle Phil is back home with Judge Walker, not knowing the disaster that awaits them. As the dinner progresses, things seem more and more hopeful. Both men are oblivious to the fact that the meal they are enjoying is actually takeaway. But that soon changes as Carlton bursts through the front door and cries about the fire, revealing the secret to the members unaware. Will, now expecting a beatdown from his uncle, is pleasantly surprised when he instead receives a sympathetic response from him. Even Judge Walker is impressed how Jeffrey was able to cook up a meal so darn delicious in a burnt-down kitchen. All seems well until the scene transitions to 3 days later, and we see Uncle Phil still has Will within his grasp and has no intentions of leaving him anytime soon. Well, guess that sympathy was all but for a show. In this episode, we see Will trying out for a job that he finds too silly. He soon finds one that's more age-appropriate, but Carlton manages to sweep in and steal it from him, which sparks some hostility between the two. But in a shocking turn of events, Will manages to win back a high-profile client that Carlton lost, which got him replaced with Will. This causes Carlton to grow bitter. Will, with his newfound job, has been tasked to be the escort for the client's sister, Jasmine, and show her around the city. What Will did not expect, though, was that the sister would not be conventionally attractive. So, when it's finally time to take her somewhere nice, Will ends up dumping her and drops her back to her hotel, after which he is confronted by Hillary, who reminds him of his promise to not mess things up. Will then tries to find Jasmine and patch things up so that her brother does not ditch Hillary's show. His search remains fruitless. However, he discovers that Jasmine went to his place to check on him, but Carlton covered for him since he was not at home at the time. Having learned about this, Will realizes that Carlton isn't as selfish and bitter towards him as he was making him out to be. The episode ends with the cousins having rejoiced, and Will, now being stuck with Jasmine, having to take her to Santa Barbara, all because of Carlton. The whole family is up and ready to go to their respective workplaces. Ashley just so happens to have a career day at her school, which requires her father to be present in person to speak about his career. A difficult task to pull off as he will be caught up at work for the next couple of days. Will is being underutilized at his new job, which disappoints him, so he looks to Uncle Phil for some advice. Take initiative is the advice he receives. Ashley is left fuming because her father was unable to make it to her school and instead sends Carlton as her speaker even though he is unemployed, since he just got a call from the bank saying that he has not been hired. The episode ends with the whole family at the dinner table, ditching Aunt Viv's vegan food for some fast food. In the next episode, Will and Hillary are actively searching for a guest that will boost their show's ratings and keep the audience engaged. In the hunt for such a guest, they came across none other than the jury member who was dismissed by Uncle Phil. Now, that man just happens to be Will's friend's barber, so Will and Hillary go meet up with him to convince him to come to their show. At first, the man is reluctant, but the moment money enters the conversation, he does a complete 180 and immediately agrees. Now, on the show, the jury happens to say some out-of-line and straight-up mean stuff about Uncle Phil and his ability to judge, which raises some eyebrows among the viewers. This gives Uncle Phil a bad rep. He expresses his disappointment to Will and Hillary, who then try to mend things up by apologizing live on television, which also backfires quite badly. But in the end, they all reconcile with one another. Carlton, however, is somewhat successful in his hunt for a partner. The male woman who comes to deliver the reply to his postcard, which ironically he sent to find a partner, seems to have taken a liking to him, which was completely unexpected. In the next episode, we see both Carlton and Will exploring their dating lives. Will is trying his hardest to charm the ladies, while Carlton is as oblivious as ever. Carlton is so bad when it comes to dating that not only does he fumble his chances, but he also ruins it for Will. Because of this, Will says that he owes him one, to which Carlton agrees, which means going on a double date so that Will can mend his relationship with his girl. However, Carlton already has an admirer, the male lady Michelle. So Will promises him that it'll be the worst night of his life and that he won't have a chance with this girl so that he can remain loyal to Michelle. And since the boys are away on a double date and Hillary is also busy with her work, this gives Uncle Phil and Aunt Vivian some privacy so that they can share a rare intimate moment, which is extremely short-lived because Hillary returns home sooner than expected. Now, over at the date, it turns out Carlton's date already has a boyfriend, and he is one mean machine. The boys almost lose their lives when they get caught by him at the girl's apartment, but luckily they climb out of the window in time and escape the threat of the mean dog. The episode ends with the boys rejoicing at the breakfast table, talking about how confusing dealing with women can be, until Carlton makes a remark that makes Uncle Phil and Will leave in disgust. In this episode, Ashley and Derek make out in the TV lounge, and Will crashes their party like every other thing. Meanwhile, Derek asks Ashley to do their first time together, and she is kind of disgusted. Later, Carlton gets electrocuted, and Will makes fun of him with Derek until Ashley arrives, and after greeting her, Derek leaves. Meanwhile, Ashley asks about tips for the first time from Hillary, and she tells her not to worry about it that much, and that when the time is right, everything will go loose. Ashley is in her room with friends, and Will and Carlton test out the intercoms to keep checking on everyone, but instead they learn about Ashley's plan to do her first time with Derek, and they're quite baffled. They try to figure out what to do, but Carlton blames everything on Will, and they have an argument until all the girls come down from the room and tell them that Derek will not be joining them. However, he enters the house and they confront them, which leads to a more sticky situation. When Ashley comes near them, Will accidentally spills the beans, and she is super disappointed in him. Later, Derek and Ashley go together, but when the time comes for the deed, Ashley explains she is not ready for it, and that they shouldn't rush these things now. She returns home and talks to Will and forgives him for spying on her in the end. Will plays a game of poker with the little cousin, and soon he and Carlton are going to Vegas for his 21st birthday. Uncle Phil gives them their hotel confirmation and the flight checks. Later, when Uncle Phil leaves for his apartment, the women ignore him, and on the other hand, Will and Carlton arrive in Las Vegas. Their gambling life begins with Will investing $100, and the girls at home enjoy their spa session until a mouse crashes the party, and Jeffrey helps them hunt it. The boys continuously hit the jackpot in Vegas, and Will goes crazy. They return to their hotel room, and Will crashes onto the bed when Carlton mentions that they will see the Hoover Dam tomorrow. Suddenly, Will wakes up, and when he goes to the casino, he sees Carlton going absolutely nuts as he lost all of his money, and he took half of the money from Will's wallet. Meanwhile, the girls at home are still afraid of the mouse, but they suddenly shift to talking about men's negativities. On the other hand, Will and Carlton visit the casino's CEO to take back their earnings, and when he enters the room, they do like a lot of fake praise, but they severely fail to get their money back. In a moment, they receive a sign from God as they see a whopping dance award and they decide to join it. After a horrendous and absurd dance session, they somehow won the award and returned home from the gambling addiction palace. They feel glad, and in the end, the family brings out the cake for his birthday and they all wish him well. Now this time, it's Uncle Phil's birthday. When he comes home, nobody comes to meet him, but when he goes to the kitchen, everyone surprises him there. The whole family sits in the main lounge, and Uncle Phil is glad to have a family like them, except Will's a nutcase there. Either way, they toast each other with champagne, and Jeffrey announces his retirement as his son needs him in London. The next day, it's a normal morning in the household, and Jazz also makes his entrance after a long time, where he gifts something to Uncle Phil. which turns out to be a fake set of teeth, and he gets thrown out of the house in his iconic way. Carlton shows his sadness as Jeffrey leaves soon and the girls select the colors of their apartment. Meanwhile, Will sits in sadness as all of his cousins are moving out with their lives while he plans to go to a boarding school. Carlton adds salt to Will's wounds and dips. At night, the family sits for dinner and Will reveals that he will move out to an apartment soon. With Jeffrey's suggestion, he begins his apartment hunt, but things go to a sinkhole. Will returns home and tries to tell Uncle Phil that he lied about the apartment, but when he reaches the main hall, Uncle Phil breaks the news to him and the kids that they're selling the house so they can live together somewhere near the kids. In the end, Uncle Phil asks if Will has something to tell, and he just says he bought a monkey. And in the season finale and conclusion of the show, Will continues his lie of moving out to an apartment by himself and tells Carlton how big his schizophrenic apartment is. However, when Carlton pushes him a little bit more, Will reveals his lie, but he asks Carlton to promise not to tell Uncle Phil. The next day, everyone is out of the house except Jeffrey and Will, and until they come out, Will shows the potential clients around the house as it is on sale now. Will somehow stops them from buying the house for his own sake. But a few moments later, Uncle Phil gets a call from the realtor and they decide to buy their house. However, they have to move out in a week and Will is now cornered. 6 days later, everything is packed, but Will is still on the apartment hunt. When everyone reunites in the lounge, they ask Will to show them his apartment. But this makes him tell his lie to everyone. Uncle Phil asks everyone to give them space and he asks why he lies. Will explains how he does not want to be a burden to him and Uncle Phil consoles him. Now they go together to look for an apartment, and at night, Will and Carlton share their last dance and they hug each other to realize their bond of more than brothers now. The final day arrives and everyone is ready to move out. Uncle Phil asks Will to not become a ghost as he sees him just like his son, and Will now bids farewell to everyone, including Jeffrey. In the end, Will takes the apartment keys from Uncle Phil and bids farewell to his throne of the city of Bel-Air as he moves away from the house, now nothing more than a ghost town. And this was the entirety of the show, The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. Thanks for sticking till the end with us, and if you enjoyed our video, drop us a like and consider subscribing to us for more. We'll see you in the next one, and for now, take care. Peace.